Marcus Reynolds, a decorated Army veteran, was pulled over for a minor traffic infraction, only to face suspicion and condescension from officers Whitaker and Simmons. Their rigid assumptions and harsh scrutiny made a routine stop feel like a personal attack, igniting anger and frustration. But just as tension peaked, Captain Lauren Hayes arrived, recognizing Marcus's honor and commanding respect from the officers in an instant. And just wait until you see how the narrative flips completely, how a moment of injustice transforms into a powerful story of recognition, leadership, and justice fulfilled. Marcus Reynolds gripped the steering wheel with steady hands, though his chest thudded like a drum in his ribcage. The streets of downtown Atlanta were quiet for a Thursday evening, the glow of streetlights reflecting off his polished sedan as he navigated through traffic. He had just left an interview at a promising firm, a potential turning point in his civilian life. The sense of accomplishment lingered, warm and fragile, until the sudden flash of blue and red lights in his rearview mirror shattered it. Pulling over instinctively, Marcus's heart sank. He wasn't guilty of anything. His driving had been careful, precise, but dread pooled in his stomach nonetheless. He had encountered this scenario more times than he could count, and each encounter carried the same familiar weight, an invisible suspicion directed at him because of his skin, because of a stereotype, because society often judged him before it had even spoken to him. The cruiser's engine hummed softly behind him, a mechanical threat in the quiet night. A door opened, and Officer Dan Whitaker emerged. He was young, barely out of the academy, his uniform crisp, his expression unreadable but tense. As he approached, Whitaker's hand hovered near his holster, a reflex Marcus knew too well. The officer's voice was sharp, clipped, lacking warmth. "License and registration," Whitaker demanded, leaning slightly toward the car window. There was an edge to his tone that made it clear this wasn't a routine courtesy check. Marcus handed over his documents, keeping his movements calm, deliberate, aware of the high stakes in every gesture he made. He had faced combat situations where split-second decisions meant life or death. Yet, here he was, feeling the same surge of anxiety from something utterly mundane, a traffic stop. Whitaker's eyes studied him with a cold intensity. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" he asked. Marcus's calm response, measured and polite, did nothing to ease the tension. The officer's gaze tightened, suspicion etched into every line of his face. The minor lane change he had committed, a barely perceptible drift into the turn lane, was suddenly magnified, transformed into an accusation. Marcus's chest constricted. Rage began to simmer beneath his composed exterior. It wasn't just the injustice of being stopped unfairly. It was deeper, rooted in a lifetime of experience. Marcus had worn the uniform of his country, had faced dangers overseas, had sacrificed with no expectation of glory or reward. Yet even after his service, even after proving his commitment to law, order, and his community, he remained vulnerable to suspicion, to scrutiny, to subtle but undeniable bias. Every encounter like this felt like a reminder that history had not been kind. Stories of injustice, of routine harassment, of assumptions made before words were exchanged, crowded into his mind. Each memory acted like kindling on a fire that had never fully burned out. The anger was not blind or irrational. It was the response of a man who understood the system and had experienced it firsthand. Marcus's fingers tightened around the steering wheel, his jaw clenched, his knuckles whitening. He reminded himself to breathe, to stay composed, to answer each question with civility despite the electric tension in the air. Inside, however, his thoughts raced, cataloguing each perceived slight, each historical burden, each instance in which respect had been withheld from him because of his skin or his background. The moment stretched. Whitaker's impatience seemed to grow, his eyes darting between Marcus's face and the documents in hand, searching for confirmation of some assumed guilt. Every second amplified the indignity, every pause weighed heavier than the last. Marcus felt the sharp sting of injustice, the visceral, unmistakable sensation of being unfairly targeted, a soldier's honor questioned on the streets he had sworn to protect. And yet, beneath the anger, Marcus steadied himself. He knew that the next minutes could determine the tone of the encounter. His training, both military and personal, had taught him restraint in the face of provocation, clarity in the midst of tension. The fire of anger burned, yes, but it would not consume him, not here, not tonight. He would respond with composure, with dignity, with the quiet strength that had guided him through battlefields and beyond. The flashing lights behind him reflected off the dashboard, painting his face in red and blue, a silent mirror of conflict. Marcus's body tensed and relaxed in measured rhythm, his eyes meeting Whitaker's, unflinching, unwavering. The anger was real, palpable, undeniable, but so too was the resolve that it would not define him. Tonight he would stand his ground, even when the world seemed determined to misunderstand him. The night stretched, heavy and oppressive, as Marcus Reynolds sat in his car, the weight of flashing blue and red lights pressing down on him like a tangible force. He had hoped that Officer Whitaker's initial tension would ease with time, that civility and patience might diffuse the charged air. But instead, the tension intensified. The distant hum of city life felt muffled, as if the world itself had narrowed to this small, suffocating space between two uniformed figures and him. Whitaker's partner, Officer Jill Simmons, arrived, her presence adding another layer to the unease. She approached with brisk steps, clipboard in hand, her expression a mixture of professionalism and barely concealed skepticism. "Evening, sir," she said, her tone polite, yet laced with condescension. "Do you know why we pulled you over?" Marcus repeated his careful explanation, each word chosen to convey cooperation, patience, and respect. Yet, instead of diffusing the situation, his responses seemed only to heighten their scrutiny. Every gesture, every blink, every subtle shift in posture was interpreted as defiance, as if his very being was under accusation. Marcus's chest tightened. He could feel the familiar rush of anxiety mingling with frustration, an old companion he had hoped never to see again. Memories he had buried deep resurfaced. Long days in harsh climates, the grueling discipline of military service, nights spent awake protecting others, and sacrifices made quietly without recognition. His medals sat at home in a wooden case, symbols of honor that, in this moment, felt like distant echoes. His spotless record, his commitment to law, his years of serving his country, all irrelevant. None of it mattered here, under the unforgiving glare of suspicion. Inside the car, Marcus felt a hollow ache forming, a sense of invisibility despite his presence, a dissonance between who he was and how he was perceived. It was more than frustration. It was a profound personal pain, rooted in the injustice of being judged not for actions, but for assumptions. He was exhausted, not physically, but emotionally, by the constant balancing act of proving his worth in spaces that seemed predisposed to doubt him. He felt powerless, caught in the current of circumstance and bias, unable to steer the course despite the clarity of truth on his side. As Simmons asked another round of questions, Marcus's mind drifted to moments from his past where similar indignities had left lingering scars. The small injustices piled one on top of the other, invisible to the casual observer, but unbearable to those who lived through them. Each interaction in his life, no matter how honorable, seemed shadowed by the unspoken assumption that he must be guilty of something, that he must prove himself over and over again. The injustice of it all twisted in his chest, a reminder that recognition and respect were not always granted, even when earned. The car seemed to shrink around him. The dashboard lights, the reflections of street lights, and the constant flicker of the cruiser's patrol lights created a disorienting pattern, a visual echo of the confusion and humiliation Marcus felt. The world outside moved on as usual, traffic passing, pedestrians unaware, the city breathing. But he was trapped in this bubble of scrutiny. The isolation magnified the sting, the unfairness, the deep-seated pain of having his integrity questioned without cause. Marcus's thoughts flickered between anger and sorrow. The anger from the initial stop had settled into something quieter but heavier, a personal ache born from the realization that a lifetime of service, honor, and diligence did not shield him from suspicion. He felt small, not in stature, but in influence, a man reduced to assumptions and prejudice despite the weight of his history. Every passing second seemed to amplify the injustice, and he sat there, rigid but trembling inwardly, feeling the slow burn of humiliation and helplessness. Yet, even in the intensity of this pain, there was an awareness that he had endured before. This moment was heavy, yes, but it was not the end of his story. The frustration and humiliation gnawed at him, but beneath it, a quiet resolve began to stir, one that would not be broken by circumstance alone. The night pressed on, the lights flickered, and Marcus waited, caught between suffering and the faintest glimmer of hope that recognition and fairness could still emerge. The tension in the night air had become almost tangible, a weight pressing down on Marcus Reynolds from every direction. The flashing lights of the cruiser painted the interior of his car in alternating shades of red and blue, each flicker amplifying the uncertainty and humiliation he felt. His hands, once steady, now gripped the steering wheel with quiet intensity, muscles taut with anticipation. The questions from Officers Whitaker and Simmons continued, sharp and insistent, their scrutiny unrelenting. Marcus's calm composure had held so far, but he felt the first cracks of exhaustion forming. He had faced dangerous situations abroad, had stood on battlefields where the stakes were life and death. Yet this quiet street in Atlanta, under ordinary city lights, had become a battlefield of a different kind, a battle for respect, for acknowledgement, for dignity. Then, as if cutting through the dense fog of tension, a voice rang out, firm and unmistakable. "Marcus Reynolds?" The words carried authority, a resonance that made the officers immediately shift in their stance. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. He turned his head slightly, squinting toward the source of the voice. Emerging from the shadows of the precinct building, walking with measured purpose, was Captain Lauren Hayes. Captain Hayes had been appointed the precinct's new commander only weeks earlier, but her reputation preceded her. A veteran of over 20 years in law enforcement, she had navigated systemic bias, internal politics, and the complex demands of leadership with resilience and integrity. Her presence on the scene was like a sudden current, shifting the energy of the night. The air seemed to tighten, then loosen in the same instant, as if her mere arrival demanded attention and respect. Whitaker and Simmons straightened immediately, exchanging subtle glances that betrayed a mix of surprise, uncertainty, and anxiety. Marcus, feeling the sudden shift, felt his jaw unclench slightly. The tight knot of tension in his chest loosened, replaced by a flicker of hope that had been almost dormant. For the first time since the stop began, he sensed the possibility of fairness, of recognition, of justice tempered by authority rather than suspicion. Captain Hayes approached the car with a deliberate calm. Her eyes, sharp and perceptive, scanned the scene, taking in the nervous officers and the seated veteran. She carried herself with a quiet confidence that immediately established the hierarchy of the moment. Without hesitation, she requested Marcus's identification and reviewed his credentials and military record. Each document she examined seemed to reinforce the legitimacy, the honor, and the integrity of the man sitting quietly in the car. When she looked up, her gaze was firm, unyielding. "Gentlemen," she said, her tone commanding yet measured, "show the respect that's due." Her words were simple, but they carried weight. They were not a request. They were a reminder of principle, of protocol, of decency. Whitaker and Simmons, now acutely aware of the significance of her presence and the authority behind it, snapped to attention. Their previous posture of suspicion was replaced with a sudden, almost startled acknowledgment of Marcus's rightful standing. Marcus felt something stir within him, a quiet, growing optimism. The tension that had felt suffocating moments earlier had begun to shift into a sense of possibility. He had been a target of prejudice, his experience questioned, his integrity doubted, yet in this instant recognition was tangible. The encounter, which had begun as a confrontation, was now transforming into a moment of validation. Justice, in its simplest and most human form, seemed within reach. As Captain Hayes stood between Marcus and the officers, a sense of calm authority radiated outward, creating a protective space around him. The streetlights, once harsh and intrusive, now felt less oppressive. Marcus's breathing eased, his shoulders, heavy with frustration and humiliation, relaxed slightly. The hope ignited in his chest was fragile but real, a spark that would guide the next steps of this unexpected night, a signal that fairness, respect, and acknowledgment could prevail, even in circumstances that had seemed stacked against him. In that charged, flickering light, Marcus Reynolds experienced the first true sense that the narrative could change, that the night would not end with humiliation, but with a turning point, a moment where recognition and dignity were not just abstract ideals, but immediate realities. The night had shifted completely. The tension that had gripped Marcus Reynolds just minutes before, the oppressive weight of suspicion, the sting of humiliation, was replaced by an unexpected, almost surreal clarity. The flashing red and blue lights that had once seemed to mock him now reflected the possibilities of recognition, respect, and justice. Captain Lauren Hayes stood nearby, calm and assured, her presence a stabilizing force, as the scene transformed from confrontation into ceremony. Marcus stepped out of his car, his posture straight, his uniform neat, his medals from military service glinting subtly under the streetlights. Officers Whitaker and Simmons, who moments ago had scrutinized him with doubt and wariness, now regarded him with a new awareness. Whitaker, the young officer whose first solo shift had been marked by rigid assumptions and overconfidence, now adjusted his stance, a quiet humility settling over him. Simmons mirrored the shift, her skeptical gaze softening into respect. "This is Captain Hayes's initiative," Marcus said, his voice steady, carrying both authority and the calm weight of experience. "I will be overseeing the coordination between military veterans and law enforcement officers to strengthen community engagement and mentorship." His words, precise and confident, seemed to resonate beyond the immediate space, echoing against the city streets and in the minds of those present. Then, almost instinctively, Whitaker and Simmons moved into the position of salute. It was not just a procedural gesture, it was an acknowledgment of Marcus's journey, his dedication, and the integrity that had carried him through the night. The same officers who had approached him with suspicion now demonstrated the respect that had been absent moments before. Marcus returned the salute, a brief but profound exchange of recognition, one that symbolized the triumph of perseverance over bias, of honor over assumption. Marcus's journey from anger and pain to this moment of triumph became a quiet emblem within the precinct. Officers nearby watched the scene unfold, some leaning against patrol cars, some walking past, all registering the significance of what had happened. It was not a display of superiority, nor a rebuke, but a living testament to the power of integrity, patience, and dedication. It reminded those who had witnessed it that leadership was not granted by rank alone. It emerged from resilience, courage, and the ability to navigate adversity with dignity. The implications extended beyond the precinct. Marcus's experience became a narrative that inspired others in the community, a story shared in local news outlets and within veteran organizations. People who had faced similar challenges, those who had experienced prejudice or felt their accomplishments overlooked, found hope in Marcus's recognition. It demonstrated that consistent commitment to one's principles, even in the face of misunderstanding, could lead to real change and respect. The flashing lights of the police cruiser, once symbols of judgment and scrutiny, now illuminated a new reality. In those beams of red and blue, the city seemed to recognize the transformation. A man who had been unfairly suspected now stood as a leader bridging two worlds, veteran and law enforcement, demonstrating collaboration, honor, and courage. Marcus's presence embodied a shift in perception, one where respect was earned through action and character, not assumed by status or appearance. Captain Hayes stepped forward, placing a hand lightly on Marcus's shoulder, her approval implicit but unmistakable. "Well done," she said simply, the weight of her words reinforcing the moment. Marcus felt a surge of quiet satisfaction. It was not the kind of triumph marked by fanfare or spectacle. It was deeper, more enduring. It was the affirmation that his dedication, integrity, and resilience had not only survived adversity, but had reshaped the narrative around him. As Marcus looked at Whitaker, Simmons, and the officers around them, he realized the power of the moment, a symbol of possibility, a reminder that even in situations clouded by bias or assumption, honor, courage, and commitment could prevail. The night that began with doubt and humiliation had ended in recognition, inspiration, and a renewed belief in the value of integrity. Heroes, sometimes overlooked, had finally received their due.